All right. Hello. Welcome back to another Trek Talk live stream where I look at one of the episodes of the original Star Trek series. This week, I am going to be taking a look at the immunity syndrome. Definitely a solid episode. I don't think it's ever really mentioned as being one of the greatest, but it's definitely on the higher end and one of the most memorable because it has one of those iconic images that I think helped establish Star Trek as such a groundbreaking show in a way with the giant well, you can see it there in the image, the giant amoeba, and we'll get to that. So as usual, I am going to be reading from Mark Cushman's book. These are the voyages for behind the scenes information on this episode. So this episode was written by Robert Saberhoff and directed by Joseph Pevney. So this is from an NBC press release issued on December 28th, 1967. Captain Kirk and his crew must destroy a virus which has annihilated 3 solar systems and another starship or suffer the same fate in the immunity syndrome on Star Trek's Friday, January 10th. The Enterprise is en route for rest and recreation when Starfleet Command orders Kirk to investigate the disappearance of the starship Intrepid. Simultaneously, Mr. Spock suffers a spasm. Upon recovering, he announces that he felt the death of the Intrepid and 400 Vulcans who were aboard. When the Enterprise gets close enough to probe a black mass which threatens the very existence of the universe, Kirk has no alternative but to pierce it with his own ship and attack from within. TV Guide. Actually, I'm going to skip that part. Let's go here. As the Enterprise loses power and is pulled closer to certain destruction, the crew becomes weaker, and Dr. McCoy deduces that they are dying. Aided by chemical stimulants, Kirk and his bridge crew struggle to stay at their posts. Time is quickly running out. To escape the pull and appetite of the giant amoeba, more information is needed than an unmanned probe can supply. Spock and McCoy each volunteer to pilot a shuttle into the center of the space phenomenon, which is clearly a suicide mission. Kirk must decide which of his friends will be sent to die. By design, at the center of the story is the age-old question, who am I? The intent of the writer was to propose one possible answer. In order to form a balance in the universe, we are collectively interconnected elements in a greater design. For the rest of us, the immunity syndrome will likely fall into the category of man against nature. No one had ever seen anything like it, and anyone with a color television set in January of 1968 was in for a treat. The optical effects for their time were groundbreaking. The direction, too, is top notch. Joseph Pevney was able to deliver a fascinating concept rich with personal jeopardy and conflict, from a script somewhat stagnant and in need of maybe more than just one polish. With the written material needing a bit more sharpening and a proper tag scene, which this episode badly lacks, the immunity syndrome is not Star Trek at its best, but it isn't far off. The concept is intriguing, the drama taut, and the visuals are dazzling. Do we really need anything better than this? Okay. So, yeah, as I mentioned, this is one of the more memorable iconic images from Star Trek, kind of like I would compare it with the image of Kirk and Spock standing, kind of next to the Guardian of Forever, or the hand, the Apollo Who Mourns for Adonais episode where the giant hand is gripping the Enterprise. Just one of those images you just wouldn't see anywhere else but on Star Trek, really. All right, now let's get into this one. So we start with the Enterprise approaching Starbase 6 for some rest and recreation, when they receive a message from the starbase regarding the USS Intrepid, a Starfleet ship that is manned by a Vulcan crew. Now, Spock suddenly reacts and becomes unsteady. McCoy and Kirk ask him if he's all right, and Spock tells them that the Intrepid and all the Vulcans on board just died suddenly. Kirk and McCoy are concerned, and Kirk orders Spock to sickbay. Then they receive new orders to investigate System Gamma 7 Alpha. Kirk protests, noting that the crew is exhausted and badly in need of shore leave. But Starfleet insists, saying that they've lost all contact with that system, including the Intrepid, which was in that system. Chekhov tells Kirk that long-range scans detect no signs of life in the Gamma Alpha system, which should be impossible as the system is heavily populated with billions of people. And as mentioned, this episode written by Robert Sabaroff and directed by Joe Pevney. Now, in sickbay, Spock insists that he is fine, and McCoy begrudgingly agrees. He asks Spock why he thinks the Intrepid crew is dead, and Spock says that he felt it. McCoy scoffs at this, but Spock insists that it's true. And this is one of those scenes here that really, it's hard to believe didn't influence Star Wars, because this scene here where Spock suddenly feels all these Vulcans dying, it really kind of recalls the scene in Star Wars where Obi-Wan says, that when Alderaan is destroyed, he feels, as if sudden of millions of voices suddenly cried out and were suddenly silenced, and he sort of senses the death of all those people on Alderaan. It really is so similar that it's hard to believe it didn't inspire that scene. Now, McCoy scoffs at this, but Spock insists that it is true. And there's an interesting exchange here where McCoy questions how 400 people could just suddenly be dead, and Spock observes that humans are often upset by a single individual death, but they often don't seem to take death in large numbers very seriously. Now, Spock returns to the bridge as they enter the Gamma 7 Alpha system and soon detect what appears to be a hole in space. Spock notes that the object is right along the Intrepid's flight path. Kirk orders Chekhov to launch a probe into the object, and he does. But then Uhura becomes dizzy, and then McCoy tells Kirk that there are reports coming in from all over the ship of people getting weak and fainting. He and Chapel are administering stimulants to the crew to combat the feelings of weariness that everyone is experiencing. Kirk asks Spock what this object is, but Spock says he has insufficient data and that there's nothing like this in the computer records. Kirk decides to enter the zone of darkness in order to learn more and orders the Enterprise forward. Now, as they enter, they hear a high pitched humming sound. And wait, did I skip over that? I guess not. They hear a high pitched humming sound, and they realize that they no longer see any stars. Kirk and the others are increasingly feeling tired, and Kirk tells McCoy to provide stimulants to the bridge crew. Then Scotty tells Kirk that they're seeing a 5% loss of power from the engines, and he can't explain it, and says that it's also affecting the deflectors. Between Spock and Scotty, no one can really give Kirk any answers, and he's increasingly frustrated by it. Now, McCoy arrives to provide the stimulants and tells Kirk that nearly two-thirds of the crew is experiencing the same feeling of severe exhaustion. McCoy asks him, or I'm sorry, Kirk asks him for answers, but he doesn't have any. And while they're discussing the issue, Lieutenant Kelly in the background collapses. Now, again, Kirk asks Spock if he can provide any information about what's happening. Spock says that they seem to be in some sort of area of energy which is incompatible with their biological and technological processes. The more time they spend in the area, the weaker they become, and McCoy recommends that they turn around and leave as soon as possible. Instead, Kirk gets on the intercom and gives the crew a pep talk, letting them know that, the Enterprise isn't going anywhere, basically giving a more, or well, really kind of less rousing version of the risk is our business speech. Then Kirk receives a message from McCoy, who tells Kirk that the entire crew seems to be dying slowly. And it was interesting because in this scene, the intercom, computer that McCoy uses is kind of dark, kind of black in color, which usually they're, that kind of gray, bluish gray color. And I'd never noticed one of the computers being this color before. It was interesting. I don't know. Maybe they just ran out of the right kind of paint. I don't know. So Kirk orders the Enterprise to a full stop. He goes down to engineering, and Scotty tells him that the energy loss is now at 12%, and he still can't find the cause. Scotty also notes that when he tried to adjust the power, it triggered the engines into reversing thrust. But when reverse thrust was activated, the ship moved forward instead of going backward. Then Spock tells them that something is pulling the Enterprise forward to the center of the dark zone, and he recommends reversing thrust. Kirk and Scotty discuss the matter, and Kirk orders Scotty to reverse the engines, and it seems to work, slowing their advance. But the pull is too strong, and they continue moving further into the dark zone. Now, later, Kirk holds a staff meeting in the conference room to discuss their dilemma. McCoy says that the further they get into the dark zone, the weaker their life signs are becoming. Scotty says that the energy drain is continuing, and their power has now been drained by about 40%. In other words, they're at 60% power now. Kirk orders a massive thrust using all available power, hoping that will help them escape the dark zone. Spock cautions Kirk that the crew of the Intrepid likely tried these same tactics to escape the dark zone and it didn't work, but he also can't offer any alternatives. So they make the attempt, but it doesn't work, and the best that they can do is hold their current position. Then they find the source of the dark zone, which is a huge pulsating mass at the center. Now, Kirk orders a probe launched, and readings from it tell them that the object is more than 11,000 miles across, and it is actually alive. And it really does, it looked good in the original episode, but it looks even better in the remastered version with the CGI effects. And I'll talk when I get into the behind the scenes stuff. I'll talk about how they did the original effects for it because it's really clever how they did it. Okay. Now they determined that the object is actually a single-celled organism, similar to an amoeba, but much larger, obviously. McCoy suggests sending a shuttlecraft to enter the creature and get further readings in order to learn more about it, mainly how to destroy it. Kirk refuses, saying that the person who is sent likely would never return. And Kirk and Spock and McCoy have a bit of an argument over who would pilot the shuttle on such a mission. Now, later in his quarters, Kirk struggles over which one to send on the mission because McCoy and Spock are both volunteering. And ultimately, he decides to send Spock. Spock pilots the shuttle into the creature, which begins draining the shuttle's power. And he determines that the creature has absorbed enough energy to begin reproduction. After this, they lose contact as Spock's signal breaks up. The readings from Spock tell them that the organism has 40 chromosomes, which are ready to begin dividing, raising the prospect that the creature will begin producing dozens of progeny, which could eventually drain star systems all over the galaxy. Now, Scotty warns that they have less than an hour of power left in the engines. Then they receive a message from Spock telling them that he is nearly out of power and that the creature can be destroyed from the inside. But his signal is lost before he can give them details on how to do it. Kirk orders them to cut the engines, and the ship is pulled into the creature. Kirk suggests using antimatter to destroy the creature by siphoning some power from the engines and using it as a bomb to create to destroy the creature. And notably, this is just the same thing that they did in the episode Obsession 2 episodes earlier when they destroyed that cloud creature. It's the same thing. Hey, let's drain some antimatter from the engines. We'll put it in a magnetic bottle, put a detonator on it, and then blow this thing up. And it's basically the same thing they're doing here. Now, Spock on board the shuttle enters a log noting that he has detected the Enterprise passing by, and he states that he gives his highest commendations to the Enterprise and to its crew. And at the same time, on the bridge, Kirk is entering a similar entry, commending Spock, McCoy, Scotty, Uhura, Chekhov, and Kyle for the highest honors if they survive this. Kirk orders another probe launched into the entity with the antimatter on board, and then they reverse course to escape from the blast. As they move away, they detect the shuttlecraft, and Kirk orders Scotty to put a tractor beam on it. And I don't know if you see it, but the shuttlecraft is right there in the shot. However, as Spock hears this, he recommends against this course of action, but McCoy tells Spock to shut up. So the antimatter bomb goes off and the organism is destroyed. And then they see normal space again, and Spock and the shuttlecraft return to the Enterprise. And it ends there. And this episode saw Mr. Kyle, who's normally a transporter technician, on the bridge, replacing George Takei, who was still gone. And I'll get to that as well in the behind the scenes stuff. Okay. Oh, and I give this one a grade of A, definitely. I would have made it A plus, but there were a couple of things I thought that could have been better. All right. So Robert Saberhoff wrote short stories before breaking into television. One of these, called Ding Dong Ghoul, was published in the June 1960 issue of Playboy, and it indicated his interest in horror and science fiction. Even though his first TV credits were mostly in westerns, he provided scripts for Death Valley Days, The Deputy, and Jeffrey Hunter's short-lived western series Temple Houston, as well as episodes of The Virginian and Bonanza. Sabaroff got his chance at filmed science fiction with 2 episodes of The Invaders, which were done just before his visit to Star Trek. For the big screen, he had recently finished the screenplay for 1968's The Split, starring Jim Brown, Diane Carroll, Ernest Borgnine, Gene Hackman, and Donald Sutherland. Sabaroff had been keeping an eye on Star Trek for some time. He said, quote, "You had to watch a lot of episodes of Star Trek to write for it. You had to know how those characters talked and reacted." Once Sabaroff felt familiar with the show, he requested a meeting with Gene Kuhn. He said, quote, "Gene explained that they had run out of guest star money, but they still had a special effects budget. He asked me to write a story that wouldn't require a guest star." For his inspiration, Sabaroff turned to the inner depths of biology and envisioned a monster that would be a single-celled organism. The structure of the story at this stage was very different from what was eventually filmed. In Sabaroff's first stab at an outline, it is medical staff member Dr. Loretta Myers, not McCoy, who competes with Spock for the assignment to take the shuttlecraft into the amoeba. Sabaroff's treatment for the script tells us, quote, "Loretta believes that the alien body is a giant virus spawned by a spontaneous generation in a force field and a sea of hydrogen atoms. But a virus can only function inside a living cell. Kirk is stunned by the concept that the universe itself is a cell, the solar system, star clusters, even galaxies being only bundles of matter arranged towards the construction of a superorganism. They, Kirk and Loretta, reflect that it would be indeed ironic if the ultimate function and historical purpose of men's evolution were to serve the function of antibodies to the universe, a line of defense against viral bodies seeking to make the universe sneeze. An ignominious reason, indeed, by Kirk standards. The most notable one by Loretta's, she wonders who the universe actually is. NBC preferred that theoretical notions of this type not be bantered about in their primetime broadcasts. The part about the irony, if the ultimate function and historical purpose of man's evolution were to serve the function of antibodies to the universe, was stricken from the script. Now, producer Gene Kuhn liked the intellectual aspects present in the story outline for the immunity syndrome. Associate producer Robert Justman, as usual, was less impressed. But Kuhn liked this fantastic voyage type idea for Star Trek and appreciated the subtle elements hidden within the story. He was determined he could work the bugs out of the script. Uh, for the revised outline, Kuhn wanted Kirk's emotional stakes increased and had Saberoff drop the character to Dr. Loretta Myers. Which, yeah, I mean, they told him from the beginning, yeah, we don't need any guest stars. And then he immediately puts this pivotal guest star into the script. Go figure. Saberoff said, quote, when you don't have a guest star or an antagonist that can be characterized, you must construct conflict within the ensemble. I got that with the rivalry between Spock and McCoy for the privilege of entering this creature. Kirk and his bridge personnel, pumped full of stimulants, are hanging on by a thin thread. Saberoff credited Gene Kuhn with helping steer his story towards the conflict that would keep it interesting despite the economy in sets and cast. Kuhn, he said, was, quote, a very under-remembered man who was one of the major creative forces of Star Trek, unquote. Ironically, by the time the first draft script arrived on September 8th, Kuhn was transferring script development duties to John Meredith Lucas, and the immunity syndrome became one of those passed on to Lucas's care. On September 14th, Dorothy Fontana. Oh, and I forgot. Sorry, I forgot to look at the comments here. Hello, Gwagnar. Good to see you, sir. Hello, FKHC 2005. Good to see you both. Next week's episode, A Private Little War. That was topical. They didn't say it was about the. Actually, FKHC 2005, I did A Private Little War about 3 episodes back. I'm doing it in production order, not in broadcast order. I should have said that at the beginning. But yeah, that was about. I did that one back in August, actually. And FKHC 2005 says, yep, George was fighting in Vietnam at Fort Benning, Georgia. Yeah, he was off doing the Green Berets at this time. I'll get into that as well. Where was I? Okay, yeah. So on September 14th, Dorothy Fontana directed a memo to Lucas, writing, quote, in general, I have mixed feelings regarding this script. I think it can be very exciting, but I feel a distinct lack of complete characterization of our leads and poor usage of them. In all, I feel Bob has missed in many areas of character development. We must be more visual and go more with the people involved, not with their voices. And there must be a rap that has a bit more action. We should see it, not hear about it in voiceovers. So Saberoff turned in his second draft screenplay on October 9th. The ending remained dark and very cerebral. Let me skip ahead here a bit. Okay, so Lucas remained busy producing the 2 interim episodes, handling the final rewrites on Gamesters of Triskelion, from the last days of September through October 12th, and then Obsession from October 13th through 17th. It was on October 17th, while Gamesters, the second of those 2 episodes to be filmed, was in its final day of production, that Lucas finally turned his attention to the script for the Immunity Syndrome without even knowing if there would be a next episode. During that painful 48-hour period, as rumors circulated through the production offices and on the soundstage that Star Trek was finished, Lucas rewrote the Immunity Syndrome. And yeah, if you'll remember in the last Trek Talk, I talked about covering Gamesters of Triskelion, that it was while they were filming that episode, or towards the filming of that episode, a rumor came out from NBC that Star Trek was being canceled and there would be no more. And then for about 2 days, they thought it was done. And then they got word from NBC that, yeah, they would be doing the rest of the season. Let's see. Okay, now the show was, quote, the show was in constant trouble for scripts and lead time to prepare and make air dates, Lucas said. Networks did little to contribute to the welfare of the series. They would wait until the last second to announce pickups, and by then it was almost too late. In Lucas's mind, the immunity syndrome was the logical choice for episode 19. It was a ship-bound bottle show requiring no new sets and only the main cast, including regular bit players Eddie Paskey, William Blackburn, and Frank Da Vinci. The immunity syndrome could easily be rushed into production with little preparation. The greater challenge for an episode such as this would be on the back end with the photographic effects. It was late in the day on October 18th before NBC gave Star Trek its mid-season pickup. Lucas had roughed out a revised draft of the script one day before and now had only 7 days before the episode was set to start filming. His next decision was not to waste any time reading memos. Quote, when I arrived, everybody had a dictating machine and would write long communiques, critiques, and suggestions on the script and work, Lucas said. These were sometimes helpful, but the time consumed in the practice of gathering everybody's opinion was considerable. Everybody dictated, secretaries were tied up in the typing of these memos, and everybody read everybody else's comments, using up still more time. I would have preferred simply a call to say, this isn't good, or we can't afford this. I discontinued the use of my dictating machine, and eventually so did everyone else. Lucas took his notes from Fontana and Justman over the phone, making it possible for him to spend every possible minute towards writing, making the deadline, but making it impossible for us to know who contributed what ideas to the script as it was developed. While considering the various suggestions from his creative staff, Lucas rushed through 3 more rewrites on October 20th, 23rd, and 24th. DeForest Research continued to send in notes to help guide Lucas through his rewrites. Peter Sloman, who read all the scripts with Joan Pierce and wrote the memos advising the producers what was possible and what was not, said, quote, at that point that Star Trek came along, it was the best of what there was around. And there were times when it was great. I mean, there were episodes that were really brilliantly done, but at the same time, it could have been better if they'd gone for a smaller audience of geeks, but then they wouldn't have gotten past the first season. So I think that Star Trek did a very good job of treading that line. It did look real and it felt real. You get the feeling that it could look like that. It could be like that. It might not be, but it could be. It was plausible. Not probable necessarily, but plausible. Filming began on October 25th without the loss of a single day for the production company. Lucas was then free to turn his attention toward a piece of the action, the next script slated to film. Okay, and a reminder, please do like this video, and if you would, please do sub to the channel. Okay, now Joseph Pevney returned after several weeks away from Star Trek to resume his duties as one of the series' 3 rotating directors. However, this would be Joseph Pevney's final episode of Star Trek. Along with the last-minute rewrites, another down-to-the-wire decision concerning the casting of the helmsman. Due to bad weather, George Takei was still on the set of the Green Berets. John Winston's character, Lieutenant Kyle, who is usually in the transporter room, was brought forward to the main helm in place of Sulu. Let me see. Can you see? There he is. You see him in the background there, getting a getting a promotion. And of course, probably his most memorable scene, of course, is the agonizer scene in Mirror Mirror, where he gets zapped by Spock. Quote, I was usually stuck down in the transporter room, Winston said, so when the scenes were shot, I'd say my view lines and let them move on to do the rest of the show. But they did put me on the bridge once or twice, and I got a good look at how they managed the madness on that short 6-day schedule. That was Shatner again. I have great admiration for him because he could pick up a page of dialogue and that was it. It got done. He'd look at it and he'd do it and do it right. And then on to the next page. Excellent work. Okay. So this started filming on October 25th, 1967. Now, William Shatner and Joseph Pevney added a near perfect ending to the episode. The script, as a result of all the rushed rewriting, ended abruptly with Lieutenant Kyle reporting that Spock's shuttlecraft is back in the hangar. With the story's intense drama having concluded only seconds before, all John Meredith Lucas could think of was to have Kirk tell Chekhov to lay in a course for Star Trek or for Starbase 6, Warp Factor 5. Feeling a need for some more punch, though, Pevney and Shatner conspired to sneak in a bit of naughty business. Kirk repeating his line from the beginning of the story and creating a bit of a dialogue bookend about looking forward to resting on some lovely planet, during which Pevney aimed a pretty short skirted woman, a yeoman, at the captain with a report for him to sign. Shatner said, quote, I'm looking forward to a nice period of rest and relaxation on some, then paused as he looked at and admired the young yeoman. Only after she smiled and turned away did he finish with a lovely planet, at which point he exchanges a mischievous look with McCoy. Okay, so on day 4, they did filming in the briefing room. Here we are. You don't get a good look at him here, but they mentioned that there was this guy here. This is an Asian actor. And I remember noticing him when I was watching the episode, and I think he was kind of put in there as kind of a Sulu replacement, basically. Just kind of, I guess, to remind you of Sulu's character or presence. I'm not sure. Okay, now on day 5, they were mainly filming Sulu, or I'm sorry, not Sulu, Spock's scenes in the shuttlecraft. Now, on this day, there was a visitor to the set. The visitor was a woman named Peggy Vickers from Garland, Texas. Miss Vickers was 27, and she had written to Leonard Nimoy asking his permission to start a fan club for him in her hometown. It began in February 1967, and in 8 months had grown to 1,197 members. As a thank you, Nimoy paid to have Vickers brought to Los Angeles for a visit to his home and the Star Trek sets. A magazine called TV Radio Show covered the promotional event for its October 1967 issue, with pictures of Vickers posing with Nimoy and director Joe Pevney, then with Spock on the transporter platform, on the bridge, and by the shuttlecraft. She said, quote, when Leonard was in a scene, I sat on the sideline watching. I got to talk to everyone. Nichelle Nichols was especially nice. She showed me some new photographs that she had taken, and I was really impressed with the authenticity of the set. The spaceship looked so real. The biggest thrill of the day for me was lunch. I just had a tuna fish sandwich and then a Coke, but I stood in line with Leonard Nimoy and the other cast members at the lunch truck parked outside the stage. They really made me feel like one of them. Okay. Now this was, as mentioned before, this was Joseph Pevney's 14th and final episode of Star Trek. He explained when Gene Kuhn left the show, much of the discipline from the show had gone. From the time I made Arena to the time I did my last episode, there was a hell of a difference. The actors were already ingrained in behavior patterns which didn't permit inventiveness, which was, as they felt, opposed to their character. That was the beginning of the problem. Bill wouldn't do certain scenes because Kirk wouldn't do that. Leonard certainly felt that way too, and very strongly, because his character was so deeply ingrained that he felt he knew precisely how Spock would behave in a certain setting. This attitude on their part was right in certain aspects, with the actors protecting himself, but wrong in the fact that the director is the director. You want to be a director? Fine, go be a director. But when I am the director and you're the actor, you make the greatest contribution you can, and I make the choices. I couldn't enjoy working on Star Trek anymore. The show's whole character had changed for me. Nimoy, disagreeing with Pevney's thinking, said, quote, I've always felt very strongly that the actor is the protector of the character. The character is stuck with the actor who plays him. It is sort of a parent-child relationship. The actor is the keeper of the character in terms of developing it and in terms of the continuity and credibility of the character. The writers come and go, producers come and go, directors come and go. Those are revolving door jobs. It's up to the actor to keep the character protected. Defending his right to know what Kirk would do and what he would not do, Shatner said, quote, "I think there's a great deal of my own personality in the character, if only because with 79 shows, day after day, week after week, year after year, the fatigue is such that you can only try to be as honest about yourself as possible. Fatigue wipes away any subterfuge that you might be able to use as an actor in character roles, or trying to delineate something that might not be entirely you. So you're just so tired that it can only be you. So I think that in Kirk there's a great deal of me." Robert Saberhoff saw no problem in the performances and said, quote, "It was a pleasure to write for good actors. I wrote stuff that I wouldn't have dared without the foreknowledge that they were able to execute it. Many actors are lost without an antagonist to play off of. This episode had to be totally internal to the ensemble cast, and it took good acting to pull it off. William Shatner was quite a character. He was able to play his role with force and command, but at the same time with a sense of humor and irony, which is necessary to make it work. And Leonard Nimoy was absolutely brilliant." Okay. Now, the challenge of immunity syndrome was not so much with the production, but with post production. Optical effects never before imagined were needed for this episode. The process used to create the amoeba in space involved using colored oils and water, mixing them together, and then they were pressed between glass slides and then photographed with a microscopic lens. And as we all know, oil and water don't mix, allowing for the different shapes and even how some shapes would swell and contract as the glass slides were moved. After 2 months, the special effects artist did not disappoint. For their time, these effects were truly mind boggling. The impressive shots of the Enterprise in this episode and the previous episode were contributed by Howard Anderson Company and Film Effects of Hollywood. Yeah, it really does. And obviously, the updated, remastered stuff looks better than the original. But I think they did a good job of kind of capturing the look and feel of the original stuff, the original effects. And even the original stuff did look very striking. And but it really shows, in some of these scenes where they're inside the amoeba itself and flying around in it. Like that there, you can see where it's kind of murky. You couldn't get that in the original effects. And I didn't capture it well, but there's a couple of shots where there's some of these masses inside that are supposed to be, I don't know, some sort of proteins or something like that. And they would actually bump against it and the thing would come apart or something like that. Again, just really visually really cool to see. Okay, now it's notable that this was the first episode of Star Trek that was funded and controlled by the new studio, with the Paramount Television logo replacing the Desilu logo at the end. Being a bottle show with no guest stars, the first Paramount episode came in close to budget at $171,391. All right, so ratings wise, uh, in the first half hour, it was a pretty standard. Star Trek came in second, just narrowly beating out Operation Entertainment on ABC, but still a distant second behind Gomer Pyle on CBS, which continued to dominate this time slot. And then in the second half hour, Star Trek actually slipped to third, being about one rating point behind Operation Entertainment. It was an eye-opening episode of Star Trek. The ratings per Nielsen said it did about the same as all the episodes for the season. During the second half hour, it slipped under Operation Entertainment by about 1 percentage point of the households watching TV at the time. This ABC series had the popular Dick Cavett as host for this segment, with a show from Fort Hood, Texas, featuring performances by Louis Armstrong, Joni Summers, and Richard Pryor. Gene Roddenberry said, quote, "Getting that episode on the network was a small miracle because of NBC not wanting to challenge anyone's ideas concerning the origin of life or the purpose of man. Some things were lost from the story as a result." And Robert Justman said, quote, "It was always a difficult task in deciding which episodes would not repeat. There was no question this episode would make the cut, though, due to the photographic effects, if for no other reason." Okay, and since this was a bottle show and there was no guest stars, this is actually a pretty short one. So I'm pretty much done with this episode. So next week will be a piece of the action. And what else? What else is going on? So I'll probably stream again Sunday as I usually do. I hope to have another video out later this week. Top 10 Marvel villains for The Flash. I hope to have that done hopefully by the weekend. And as always, thanks to everyone who tuned in. Thanks to those who will catch it on a rewatch. Please do like the video and sub to the channel if you haven't already. And I will see you all next week. Until then, have a good evening.